Removing an unsightly color cast goes a long way towards creating a professional looking image, but there are also times when we want to create a color imbalance to achieve a particular mood. In this lesson, we'll take a look at ways to achieve either task. Let's go back to our Chapter 3 folder and open Color Balance 01. Now with this image, we see the color balance as it was recorded by the camera. Let's take a look at one way to change that. In our Adjustments panel, we're going to click on Photo Filter. Now what this tool does is really simulate the kind of filters that photographers would carry around in their bag to change the color temperature of an image. By default, Photoshop selects a warming filter, but if you click on this pull down, you can see a list of many others. I'm going to select here a different warming filter, 81, and you can see that that warms up the image to an even greater degree. Now we have a density slider here, which lets us control the strength of this filter. If I drag it to the right, you can see the image gets even warmer. If I come down here to the left, we can see by reducing the density, I can get a much more natural, realistic effect. So here's the before and after. The image started at a rather cool color temperature, and here I've warmed it up considerably in just a single step by going to Photo Filter. Now let's open a second image here. We'll go back to our Chapter 3 folder and open up Color Balance 02. For this image, we're going to take a look at the Color Balance tool. So we click Color Balance in the Adjustments panel, and here we've got the ability to move between cyan and red, magenta and green, and yellow and blue, and we can target these changes to shadows, midtones, or highlights. We're going to leave it here set to the default midtones. That's going to have the greatest overall image effect. And if I take this first slider, as I drag it left towards the cyan region, you can see that the whole image gets cooler, and more specifically gets a more cyanish tone. If I drag it over here to the right, for example, the image warms up. What I'll do here is choose a relatively small move on the reds, maybe about 5 or 6. 5 looks pretty good. Let's take a look at the next slider. We can move the image towards a more magenta or towards a more green tint. In this case, I think we'll leave this set to 0. And now for yellow and blue, we can move, you guessed it, between a yellow and blue toning of this image. If we move the slider towards blue, we're going to get a cooler image. Since we moved in the red direction in the first slider, meaning we wanted to warm the image, let's enhance that by moving over here to yellow. I'm going to come down pretty significantly just so you can see how much we can change this image. Right about there. So if we take a look at where we started, it's as if we shot the same image but at different times of day. Here's what you might get in midday with a strong sun in the sky. Or if you shot this image at dawn, you might get a much cooler effect like that. So you can see just how quick and easy it is to adjust the color balance of an image to get completely different renditions of the color tone. With these first two images, we were simply making them either warmer or cooler, but we were starting off with a fairly good and believable color balance to begin with. But there are going to be times when you're going to have to fix an incorrect color balance. Let's take a look at how we would do that. Let's go back into our Chapter 3 folder, and this time open the file Color Balance 03. Now here you can see we've got a situation that has a very strong and undesirable color cast. This image was shot indoors with incandescent lighting, and the camera was not auto white balanced to accommodate for that. So the camera maybe thought it was shooting in outdoor daylight, but we were shooting inside, and that's why we have this overly yellow warm image. But we can fix this, and we're going to use the Curves tool to do it. So back to our adjustment panel, and we'll click on Curves. I'm going to begin by selecting the On Image Adjustment tool. And the very first thing we want to do here is find something in the image that should be neutral. Now when I say neutral, what do I mean? Neutral simply means equal red, green, and blue values. The RGB channels should have the same number. We're looking for something in the image that should not have a color cast to it. Now what in this image should be neutral? Well, first I'll tell you what should never be neutral. Skin tones. People's skin should always have some sort of color, some sort of cast to it. So that's not a good candidate. But looking here at the background of the image, we've got a white wall. Now we've got molding alongside the wall too, and the molding is definitely off-white, but this wall should be white. White is a neutral color. Now neutrals can be white, they can be light gray, they can be dark gray, they can be medium gray, but in this case it's going to be a white area. So we want that wall to read as a neutral color. And here's how we're going to achieve that. With our on-image adjustment tool selected, in the previous lesson we simply clicked and that placed a point on the composite RGB curve. Here we're going to do something a little different. I'm going to hold down the Command-Shift key on Windows, that would be Control-Shift on a Mac, and moving the mouse just over this part of the wall above her sleeve, I'm going to click. Now because we were holding down Control-Shift, Command-Shift on a Mac, no point has been placed on the composite RGB curve, but if I move over here and click on this menu and select the red curve, we can see we've got a point placed on the red curve. And we have another point placed on green and a point placed on blue. So that keyboard shortcut of Control-Shift on Windows, Command-Shift on Mac places individual points on each red, green, and blue channel. Very, very important here because we're not trying to affect the brightness of the image, we're trying to affect the balance of the red, green, and blue channels. Now before we go further, we're a little tight on window space here, so I'm going to click this info panel and drag it out here so we can see the info panel and adjustments at the same time. I'm going to set this back to the RGB composite channel. And what I'm going to do here is I want to show you how off the color balance here in the image is. If I go and select this point right about here where I clicked, we can see the values for the red are 227, green is 220, and blue is 192. We've got much more red than anything else. I'm going to hold down the Shift key and click, and that places a color sampler point here. So no matter where I move my mouse around the image, we can keep an eye on this set of RGB values. Now let's go back to our red channel here, and because we have more red than anything else, what we'd like to do is take the red down a bit. With this point selected on the red curve, I'm simply going to use my down arrow key on the keyboard and press down a couple of times. Get down there to about 221. You can see the color balance has started to shift. Let's click now and go to our blue channel, and with the point selected on the blue channel, we're going to press the up arrow key. We want to move our blue values up. So we're starting at about 192. We're moving them up here. And you can see the closer we get to 220, 221, the better our image looks. There's 220. So right now, we're at a value of 221, 220, 220. And the image looks very, very good. We have effectively color balanced the wall and have that effect spill over to the entire image. Now if you want to take the time and make it exactly 220 on all three channels, that's perfectly fine, but to be 1 or 2 points off is not an issue at all. Really, you want to go visually with how the image is looking on the screen. And let's take a look at our before and after. If I toggle this eyeball icon off and on, here's where we started, a heavy yellow color cast. And simply by Control-Shift clicking on Windows, Command-Shift clicking on a Mac, I've been able to place individual points on the red, green, and blue curves and alter the color balance, eliminating a very strong color cast and ending up with a neutral color.